if you have one sort of radical social justice activist type young person in the organization, they will weaponize every sort of protection for feeling harassed or uncomfortable they have on the books, and there's tons of laws like that.
Did you happen to see the video when I was speaking at University of New Hampshire and like hundreds of protesters showed up with noisemakers and they were screaming at me and all this?
I need more. That sounds like everything.
Like you could have wrote a book about it. But there was a really interesting moment. So that, you know, they're shouting me down and they have noisemakers and every few moments they've set up people to chant.
Yep.
And I keep getting right in their face. I mean, as close as we are, and say, you know, they won't look at me, right? Because they won't look at you because they don't even want to think you're a human. But I kept saying, you know, instead of chanting, I'm standing right in front of you, ask me a question, but they won't do any of that stuff. But I bring this up because there was a moment where an older woman, who I don't know if it was a faculty member or just a local member of the community or something, started screaming that these students could be killed when they walk out of here. They could be killed and you don't care, something to that effect. And I thought, this is really out of control, like not just the screaming and the rest of it, but the idea that students at the University of New Hampshire, who are all privileged in the true sense of privilege, I don't care about their skin color or their gender or their sexuality, privilege in that they're at a great school where, you know, you can learn and, you know, you're going to be basically treated okay and all that, but that people are trying to put the idea in their mind that they're going to walk off campus and be slaughtered, and then they start believing it.
Right, and that it's a matter of being killed. Again, some students might have grievances that I would agree with. They obviously have financial because of student loan, all that. So I'm sympathetic to some students on things like that. But they're not literally going to be killed. Like, that is scaring people. And we know as libertarians, when you scare people, that's when you get them fired up to support like a police state and government intrusions that have all sorts of negative side effects. I mean, that was part of the reason I was pushing back at that subcommittee. Just remember, when we empower the government to do something because people are scared, that has all sorts of negative consequences for your liberty. But I had the same experience when I saw Charles Murray speak at Michigan, which is where I graduated from. And yeah, there was a student screaming at him as he tried and failed to speak because there was no way to do so, that Charles Murray wanted him dead. And the one thing that sapped kind of the power of the mob very briefly was when another student, who was a minority student, stood up and said, well, I don't think I agree with Charles Murray, but I'd like to hear what he has to say. I don't know how I'm supposed to know what he thinks unless I actually hear this talk. And that was the thing that, so then the mob doesn't know how to deal with that.
Right.
They're not, when they're challenged by someone else on their side, another student, a faculty member, something like that, they can stand down in some cases because they are relying on nobody's going to do anything to them. You know, because again, they're a minority. There's just a small number of people. And they used to do this, and then they would stop because they would get in trouble, or the other students would say, would you please shut up? I would like to hear this person. And they would, you know, they read the room. They knew if people were going to turn on them, they're not going to put themselves in that position. So now the problem has been for the last like 5 years. People are just not doing that. They're letting the mob shut down the speaker, and they're just afraid to say anything.
What do you make of the self-righteous nature of this? The idea that they walk into these rooms. Now, I get it. They may think that these are awful people, and I won't even sort of besmirch their intentions, right? So they think that they're under attack and all of these things. But what do you make of the self-righteous nature that they think that sort of everyone before them was a bigot and a racist or an idiot or a buffoon or somehow evil? But not only that, they also think that all of their equals, the students that are their equals, should be basically silenced because they don't even have the opportunity, like that kid wanted, to hear the speaker.
Right. Free speech is a double right. That's actually something Frederick Douglass said. It's the right to be heard as well as the right to speak. I mean, all these other students who would probably like to hear this person again, even if they don't agree with the person. One of my formative experiences as an undergraduate was I was writing for the campus paper, and I went to cover an event that Bill Ayers, this radical weather underground domestic terrorist, whatever you want to call him, he was speaking. And I interviewed him for the paper, and I thought that was so cool. I'm interviewing, you know, a historical figure. I'm a young person who wants to be a journalist. Like, that was a really cool educational experience for me.
You mean that doesn't mean you agree with everything he said just because you talked to the guy?
Well, but think if like conservatives had been running the campus then, or if their concerns that a dangerous or person, it's the exact same thing. He makes us feel unsafe. he shouldn't be allowed on campus. And there were Republican legislators who said that exact thing.
Right. Well, he did commit actual acts of violence, though, so it's a little bit different. But I get the point. Yeah.
But so it's college. You're there to learn from interesting people. You're paying a ton of money to do it, to deprive the other students of their opportunity to hear and to speak and to question these people. Again, an experience that they're paying an exorbitant amount of money to have. There's just a selfishness to doing that. But again, they say we are obligated because people's lives are on the line and we are protecting people's safety. Their emotional comfort is on the line if they don't feel this is a home to them. And you can't bring this awful racist person into our home, or this person who some awful racist person maybe retweeted or quoted once. You can't bring them into our home. It's our home, and that's wrong.
Yeah. And someone needs to tell them it's actually not their home. I mean, that's what the girl that was yelling at Nick Christakis kept saying, right? This is supposed to be our home, but no, it's actually not your home. It's your place where you're supposed to learn.
I mean, everybody does want to feel comfort on some level, right? Like, comfort is a natural. I'm not going to bash them for wanting there to be some level of civility, maybe, but they're not practicing civility when they do these things. So it's they're screaming at people. So and again, it's not exactly, if it's a public university campus, I mean, they're supposed to be in the public square. They're supposed to be uncomfortable speech. People can chalk horrible things about Trump or whoever the Republican president is. They did that at Michigan when I was there. Mm-hmm. The crazy homophobic preacher can scream crazy Westboro Baptist Church-like things in the public square. I mean, these used to be things that the progressive ACLU type consensus said nope, we're going to allow. And these students completely reject that view. And in fact, they hate the ACLU for even once having it and would like them to unhave it as soon as possible. Which
sort of the ACLU is kind of flaking on some of these things at this point, right?
Yeah, there are some real concerns. I think the organization itself is trying to figure out how it can appease the kind of progressives that want it to not hold so tightly to those commitments. But I think a lot of people at the ACLU want to hold to those commitments, but they just don't know exactly. But it really is in tension with these very loud, even some of the people who work for them. Again, the theme of the book is it only takes one. If you have one sort of radical social justice activist type young person in the organization, they will weaponize every sort of protection for feeling harassed or uncomfortable they have on the books. And there's tons of laws like that. Title IX at the universities, other titles for private sector businesses, and they can make it so that you just can't have difficult or uncomfortable conversations in the college and in the firm.
That's why it's so fascinating what's going on with them, because it's like, you guys used to defend everybody's right all the time. The Skokie case obviously is the big one. Nadine Strossen, her book Hate. Yeah. It's like,
and she's wonderful, here. By the way. I'm not bashing.
No, she's incredible, but she's not.
She's
not working there anymore. Yeah. And you can see how social justice has just sort of infected.
I mean, the Westboro Baptist Church case. I mean, these were people screaming at military servicemen who had died for their country, screaming horrible things about them. If that speech, hate speech, is protected under the First Amendment, everything that Charles Murray says or whatever the students are upset about is clearly protected. Yeah. But they also don't have a very good education about the First Amendment, which isn't just them, that's just the whole country. When you quiz people on what the Bill of Rights
actually mean?
Nobody knows, maybe for reasons we discussed earlier in this interview. But so many of them think hate speech is already illegal. I talked to activists who said, I just want the college to bring its hate speech policy in line with federal speech law.
Oh, you do?
Guess it's already in line by not having one.
Yeah, and by the way, that's not really what they want, because if they understood what it was, that's the last thing that they want. Right. They don't want that exchange. You mentioned Arizona State.
Yeah.
So I was at Arizona State about a year and a half ago. I was speaking there with Michael Shermer from Skeptic magazine, and I did this little thing. Sometimes I do it when I'm doing stand-up, where I just kind of poll the crowd. How many conservatives are here, how many liberals are here, progressives, blah, blah. And then at the end I said, how many Nazis are here? And usually nobody applauds. One person in the back, a woman, started applauding that she was a Nazi.
Wow.
So I said to her, all right, that was kind of surprising, and everyone's looking at her and it's all kind of awkward. I said, but when we get to the Q&A, I will gladly give you the microphone first, and you can share your Nazi thoughts. Anyway, we do that, we do just that, and she goes on and on about how the Holocaust is a hoax, and Michael Shermer, who's debunked a lot of these Holocaust skeptics, she asks him some questions, and he just has all the facts, and he just, smacks her down in a totally respectful way, but sort of puts her in her place with facts. I mention all this because it turns out that this Nazi was a trans woman. Which I just think is just sort of hilarious in just
Isn't
the way
intersectionality beautiful?
in just the psychotic way that intersectionality works or doesn't work. It was a trans woman identifying as a Nazi, and I thought that is a real something.
It's funny you mentioned having a Nazi in your crowd. So in part of the research I did for this book, I found out that it was either 1963 or 1964. The progressive student group at Berkeley, this is right after or in the middle of the Berkeley free speech movement, where you had progressive students and conservative students, the students really rising up and saying, no, we're going to have whatever speakers on campus we want, we're going to do whatever political organizing we want, the administration can't tell us we can't. That was the free speech movement. The progressive student group was so committed to free speech that they invited a member of a Nazi, a member of a neo-Nazi group to campus to speak. Not only did they invite him to speak, they all dressed up in full Nazi regalia to promote this event. This is in 1963. This is only 20 years removed from the actual threat of Nazism versus today. And nobody heckled the guy. He would make his remarks, and then they'd laugh at him. And when he was done, he went off, and that was that. There was no crisis of safety on the campus. No one shut him down. Can you imagine if they did that today?
They already burned the place down once, but they'd reburn it.
Right.
Yeah.
But now, when we are much further removed from the threat of actual Nazism, you could never do that. And this was the progressive students who thought it was important to do a free speech stunt, and B, what is the harm from hearing from a Nazi? We'll learn how abhorrent and dumb Nazism is.
Yeah.
If you want to, when Richard Spencer is speaking at campus, for instance, shutting him down or screaming at him or getting violent is exactly what he wants.
Congrats.
Exactly what he wants. He gets to say, look at the intolerant left, look at what they'll do. They're going to do this to me, they'll do this to you next. If he gives his remarks to an empty stadium or 3 actual Nazis there, that's probably embarrassing for him. You just don't show up with the violence. You're playing into their hands.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the sort of subgroups that go on in this, because we always talk about sort of the left and the right, and it does seem like it's coming more from the left these days. But give me some of the subgroups on each side that are bubbling up.
Sure. So I did a lot of work on, since I read about sexual harassment and sexual assault and the Title IX stuff on campus, one of my chapters is about Title IX related activism, fourth wave feminism, and what has happened on campus because of that. And that's a chapter that I care a lot about because I write a lot about that.
When you were writing this, Title IX was still in effect, right?
So this is the only one that has sort of there's a good news resolution that, and again, I disagree with a lot of things the Trump administration does, but Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education, changed the guidance related to Title IX in a way that I absolutely applaud. So this is this.
Can you just explain what it is?
So this is a federal statute from the 70s. It's one sentence long. It's attached to the law that funds higher ed, all education, funds all education. If you get federal funds for your school, you can't discriminate on the basis of sex or on the basis of gender. That's all it says. That's perfectly benign. It was intended, if you have a male sports team and there's comparative interest in having you don't have to have a girls sports team if no one wants to play. But if you have people who want to play, you have to fund that team too.
You're not going to force women to play football, but if enough of them show up.
Well, we were probably getting to that point. But
exactly.
Originally in the 1970s, that was not what was going on.
Yeah.
Under the Obama administration, the assistant secretary, the bureaucrat under this, who was charged with making sure universities are complying with Title IX, started interpreting it much more broadly to include harassment and sexual assault. And they were defining these terms so broadly that sort of anything that made someone feel uncomfortable for a reason of sex or gender could be considered a Title IX problem. Now, it wouldn't actually be. If you brought this before court or something, that wouldn't happen. But universities are compliance places. So if you have this big government bureaucracy telling you, well, we kind of think you should do it this way, you're not going to fight them. You're going to roll over. So they rolled over in ways that were just disastrous for free speech because, again, speech related to sex and gender, they're saying, well, if you're making people uncomfortable for that reason, it violates the federal law. And also due process. So when there is a student accused of sexual misconduct, they were saying, well, we would like you to adjudicate this under this standard, and we really don't want you to have any like cross-examination at the hearing, and we don't want you to do any of these other things.
So they were literally obliterating due process.
They really were. I mean, there have been 100 lawsuits brought by students, usually male students, often athletes, often male students of color, by the way, or immigrants. Again, the normal issues in the criminal justice system where black people get arrested more for things, totally true in the university bureaucracy as well. These students sued for saying I was wrongfully accused, or regardless of whether it was wrongful or not, you violated my rights in a due process sense. And when it goes to court, they win. And then they sue the university. The universities were just caught because they're like, well, the government is going to yank our funding if we don't do it the way they say, but we're going to get sued and lose because this is ridiculous. This is a farce. And this was all because of this guidance from the Obama administration. But then it was, so the activist component is, activists, the guidance comes out in 2011. Sort of feminist activists on campus, I think, quickly realized within a few years of that Title IX now was this great tool for adjudicating grievances or for punishing people who engaged in speech the way you didn't like. I mean, there's literally an activist group where the leaders of it got the numeral 9 tattooed to their ankles, because that is how important this interpretation has been to feminist activism. And they... So Laura Kipnis is probably someone you're familiar with, who is a professor who. But there's all these cases. You know, there are cases that were never famous. You know, where someone just got like an F on their exam because they wrote the name of their instructor wrong on it, and someone said, you wrote, well, that's a pornographic actress's name, so you intended this as a sexual slur. And the professor actually said, so we're concerned this would violate Title IX. Again, it wouldn't. That's not what the statute means. No court would agree with you, but... And
what about those two kids? Weren't there? There was the one case of the two college students, guy and a girl, that were hooking up, and then they both went after each other for Title IX because they were basically trying to preempt each other.
Yes, that started becoming like legitimately a thing. If you had a sort of sketchy sexual encounter, which is the case in many of these, this is not... Well, right, this isn't, you know, someone broke into your dorm room and you were like held their hand over your mouth. This is, we were drunk, we were doing drugs, it began consensually, or we sort of intended to do something, then I don't remember what happened, now I'm uncomfortable about it, and maybe something bad or violence in policy did happen. I mean, these are hard to adjudicate anyway, right? Because they were relying on hazy. Alcohol is a factor in the overwhelming majority of these cases. So then you wake up from this encounter, and the first reporter has a huge advantage in these Title IX cases. So I was starting to see cases where you had the male go to the Title IX office first to accuse the woman, probably fearful that she would do it. You know, I saw cases where a fleeting kiss became a Title IX issue, where the normal, just human courtship. Again, I'm not saying sexual assault is not a problem on campuses or wherever else, but things that should not have been handled by campus authorities were being handled by campus authorities. Things that might have been regrettable or bad, or maybe they should learn, you know, don't drink so much, to the male and the female. Lessons are not being learned. This is immediately going to sort of a criminal matter that can destroy people's lives on both sides. I mean, to get expelled from college for rape, I mean, that is a huge financial hit that you're going to take.
Also, without ever having a trial for rape. That was the
without
whole point.
Having a lawyer. I mean, many of these policies said you couldn't have a lawyer there. One of the things DeVos has done is said, yes, there has to be a lawyer there if the student wants a lawyer who can ask questions of the other side. You don't have to have the man and the girl questioning each other, but you have to have at least questions interchanged. I mean, in some of these hearings, you were having not even panels. They were starting to do away with panels where it was one administrator was investigating the case, was deciding which witnesses to talk to. There was a case where the accused, again a male black football player, said, well, can you interview all these people who know, including one time the victim, because she had not filed a complaint. They were dating. and it was someone else who didn't like their relationship. So this person filed a complaint.
Wow, so a third party could file a complaint?
They were obligated to if they became knowledgeable of alleged or suspected or possible violation of Title IX.
Wow,
they were all obligated to report
That is some seriously
this is Catch-22.
Yeah.
I'm watching. There's a Hulu miniseries on it right now. I'm watching it. It's great. It's exactly that. So you had cases where, again, there's no actual dispute, and they're being adjudicated, and that guy got expelled. The administrator would not would not interview the people who knew this is all nonsense. He said, no, it's my job to determine who I speak with. And then you can't. And then he creates a report. He wasn't even recording his interviews. It was just his recollection of who he talked to. And this was standard practice across the board for the single investigator model, which was becoming very important, and then the new guidance has gotten rid of, thank God.
Yeah, man, that is some evil stuff. So I find the Title IX stuff so interesting on so many levels, because there's sort of the social justice level, there's a legal level, there's a
it goes to fundamental, sort of classically liberal due process.
Yeah, if you're accused of something, you should be able to defend yourself and use all the powers of the law that would allow you to do that.
Yes.
But the other part that I think is interesting is I remember when DeVos reversed all of these things that you're laying out of why they're so wrong. I remember the blue check celebrity Twitterati and the Bette Midlers and Sarah Silvermans and the progressives on Twitter, basically. Also, Trump hates women, he's pro-rape, all of these things, and it's like, and then you look and it's like, oh, these things get 50,000 retweets and 80,000 retweets, and it all sounds right. Trump's removing protections from rape victims, and it's like, I better scream about that, it sounds right. And they never want to hear any of the things you just said, the uncomfortable truths that you laid out there. And breaking that, well, it's very similar to breaking the white supremacy argument that you're trying to break as well.
Yeah, they don't want to hear, I mean, complicated narratives are less sexy for reporting. They don't want to hear that, actually, this is kind of a problem, and anyone who's like studied this, this issue in any seriousness knows that the existing system just wasn't working, and again, like I was saying, it was causing lawsuits from both sides, and the universities cannot handle this under the, that's like a complicated thing. Nope, this is further evidence that the administration is waging its war on women. That is an easier sort of headline. So much of the reporting when DeVos changed this stuff was just, it was clear they hadn't even read what the new guidance was going to be. In their defense, it was very long, I guess, so they didn't want to read it.
Right, but, let's not burden them.
But it was completely disconnected. So I saw some there's a journalist at Slate, actually, who's covered these things a little bit better, and he was saying, when he wrote about it, he's like, yeah, there were some problems here. I don't know if the new approach is better, but like this was not exactly working. People who'd studied the problem a little bit more closely knew that, but the activists knew that, but they wanted it to still be the other way, because they did not take the Enlightenment liberal view that these people deserve due process. They think it would be better, if everyone is expelled, even if half of them are innocent, as long as we got the other half, which is just like a total inversion, right, of kind of the Enlightenment principle that it's better, that guilty men go free than to put away even one innocent person. That's like the bedrock of our classically liberal Western understanding of justice. And they were utterly against that. And they'd say, well, we're not sending these people to jail.
We're just destroying their lives.
We're just making them unemployable forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are some of the other sort of subgroups that you dive into here? Because the fascinating thing I thought was because of the way the internet is, and message boards, or people on message boards, whatever these little groups are, and Telegram and all of these different things, that all of these little niche, very, very niche groups that often have these competing interests, they're all popping up. And it's hard to gather, and you do talk about this, like how much actual influence they have, how much momentum they have, what they're really trying to do, how much of it is just purely trolling and just trying to burn things and all of that.
Well, I'll talk about the one that's actually doing the best right now, which is the Democratic Socialists of America. Unlike many of the other groups I study, they are highly organized. They clearly have a lot of people in them, and they're poised to have a big they're having a political impact. I can't underestimate, or overstate rather, their dramatic increase in the last few years. I looked at some of the numbers for these groups. So this is the far left economic Bernie Sanders-esque group that was just a bunch of old hippies. There were a couple thousand of them from when the group started in the late 70s or 80s or whenever it was, up until 3 years ago. it was the same people. Nothing had changed. They'd gotten 30 years older, but they had not added a single new member or had a single new subscription for their publications. In the last 3 years, the average age of one of their members has dropped from like 90,000 to 30. These are highly motivated young people who are passionate about socialism. I mean, we talk a lot about cultural issues, but what animates them is the economics, the economic inequality. I interviewed people who said things like, you know, capitalism is the most evil system ever devised, and we're going to convince people that socialism is good.
While they're at their private university holding an iPhone.
Right, right. But they also hate something that makes them similar to some of the other groups. Again, they hate liberalism broadly. They hate sort of moderate liberalism, like the normie. They call them normies, right? They hate and that's everyone from like Hillary Clinton to me in the spectrum of people who like broadly like free trade and markets and stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
We're all the same. We're all just normie liberals.
In a way, they hate you, and I would include myself in that too, probably. They hate us more in a way than they hate the conservatives, right? Because they think we're sort of faking it or something like that.
Well, and Trump is weird for them because while Trump, you know, is like the most hateable for a lot of these other intersectionality groups for sort of like cultural reasons, and the things he says about immigrants, women, so on. For them, you know, they actually share some of like the trade not liking and just kind of dislike of business that occasionally Trump has sort of, you know, kind of addressed or talked about. That makes also they think the Russia stuff is stupid because they kind of like Russia probably or they admire sort of communism or something like that.
Right.
So it's actually weird to see them not as worked up about Trump in the exact same. I don't want to say they're not pro-Trump at all. They still hate him. But they hate Democrats, liberals, neoliberals who are like squishy and like markets sometime and are not radical enough. You know, they don't want Joe Biden is just as bad as anyone else. It's Bernie, maybe Warren, no one else. Everyone else is equally is tainted by the same original sin of liberalism.
Do you think there is any chance whatsoever that the modern Democratic Party, not that I have any love for the modern Democratic Party, but can the shell of that thing survive this? Or are they going to completely dismantle any remaining liberal, and JFK will be, you know, his memory will be destroyed too in the course of all that, because they'll have to.
Well, here's some moment for hope. I think it's going to be a lot harder for them to do this than maybe they expect. Right now, they're riding high on victory. They got AOC in. You know, Bernie's really popular. They think it's their moment. You know, moments don't often last as long as the people who are adherents of them think. They're going to have a lot more difficulty sort of just convincing your just sort of regular, older, maybe even religiously inclined, normal sort of Midwest, rest of America Democrat, not Republican, Democrat even. And there are a lot of those too.
Right. So they're going to have trouble getting the people that they're constantly saying are horrible.
The people who just like Biden.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people out there who just like him because he was the vice president. And again, people who are not as motivated to know every detail of policy the way your activist woke set is.
Right. But I guess my question is, do you think, so let's say, I mean, conventional thinking, if you just look at the polls, and I hate polls, but it's basically like Biden is crushing it right now. He's up by 20, 30 points over Bernie in most of the polls. And maybe to your point, Bernie already peaked 4 years ago, so maybe it's already over. But that they will have to destroy him. That it will cause such a rupture in the party that it may be what the natural entropy of it is that the party actually does have to split in two. And I think there's a version of this for conservatives and Republicans as well.
This fracturing taking place on both sides is very interesting right now because Republicans as well are kind of breaking into this more populist-y in the vein of Trump versus, I'm sure you've seen some of this fighting between National Review and First Things people over a more kind of libertarian, I mean, lightly libertarian, not even as libertarian as I am, version of the Republican Party that maybe existed. You know,
I've actually been enjoying watching that fight.
It's been very intellectual.
Because it's been intellectual, exactly. Not because it's David French and Sohrab Ahmari.
Yes.
And I've been watching it going, this is how an intellectual fight's supposed to happen. You guys are fighting for the heart of what you think conservatives conservatism is supposed to be.
Yes.
And it's basically being done respectfully, and I think they're going to sit down. I'd be happy to host it here. It's like, wow, there's something cool going on there, but that's not how the fighting is going down on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, I do see similarities, though, because, again, it's because one of the sides sees itself as ascendant. They think their political moment has arrived. And maybe it has. I mean, maybe both of these things could go the direction of you're going to have a more nationalist, trade and immigrant skeptical, you already have an immigrant skeptical, but also very trade skeptical Republican Party, and you're going to have a sort of much further left, socialist inclined Democratic Party. The way you have in Europe. The problem is with the American system, because of the way we're devised, we always just have the two parties.
Yeah.
Whereas in Europe, you can have both of these parties and then a spectrum of more libertarian or more centrist or more moderate parties.
Do you think it would help?
We can't have that.
We can't, or do you think it would help if we had
the way the system is?
Right, but do you think if we had a little more of a coalition-based system where people, because the idea that these broad blankets of left or right or Republican conservative, it doesn't really fit anymore. Do you think a coalition system might? I mean, they've got all sorts of problems because of coalitions, because those tiny parties have absurd power. You can take out anybody at any time.
I'm always skeptical that any kind of that tweaks to how the system of votes are tallied will ever translate to anything being better for what I want. But yes, I would prefer if sort of libertarian inclined people could ally with certain groups on select issues, but like maintain our own identity. And right now it's just you have to fall under the umbrella of one or the other. Which is frustrating because we're at a moment where I think both parties are moving away from. I mean, that's part of the theme that I talk about in the book, the meeting of the extremes, and that there's a radicalizing taking place on both. Obviously, on campus and in social media, we see the influence of the left. But I try not to, again, I don't want to overstate. Campus and Twitter are not the whole world. The Republicans have control of government. So,
do you think there's a way you can maybe split the difference or something? Like one idea that sort of makes sense to me is like, because I would love a somewhat functional libertarian party, but you know that if a libertarian party got in and got 5%, which they never get.
5?
Well, yeah, 5. My God, it would be incredible. But you know what would happen? Of course, it would lead to probably President Bernie or something like that. Yeah. So I don't want that. So the idea may be that what if you had something where you could vote for the whatever third party you want, and then once the 3% checks in, so there's the election now, 3% checks in, and now you know they're not going to do anything with that 3%, that then they could decide where they're going to give their support, so that people could at least still feel good about the original vote. Does that make sense? Something like that?
Yeah, that might be better.
Sort of, like, I'm just trying to, because so many people are going to be disgusted at what they have to do at the next election, and they were already disgusted last time. And I think the more we keep having to be disgusted, just the more people will just check out.
Yeah.
And
I mean, politics is by its very nature disgusting, right? Yeah. We're deciding which policies the entire country, all 300 or 400 million people, are going to have to live under. Which tyrant will be oppressing them on which things. Because we have a just sort of unitary system where the executive gets to do everything. Congress has delegated all its authority to the president, whoever the president is, not to Trump, but to the office of the presidency. Yeah. So,
and they're always happy to take more of that power.
Yeah, and Congress has been happy to say, yeah, you can decide. Congress doesn't even weigh in when we're like declaring war. They're like, no, you get to, you can choose who we bomb. We don't really care. And actually, I think the Supreme Court has in some sense stood up and is playing a role of Congress by almost adjudicating policy more directly than maybe they were intended to do, because there's just no body separate from the president, from the office of the president. Congress is just a rubber stamp. But again, and we have this big country where these rules will be for everyone. People who live in Florida, people who live in California, people who live in Iowa and Michigan, all have to listen to, even though we have different values and might care about different things, because of this just immense central government, which is not the way it was intended to be and makes us all mad at each other on Twitter and everywhere else.
Let's decentralize the whole damn thing.
Yes.
I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, Robby.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I'm still annoyed about the higher hair, but beyond that, it was pretty good.
That's going to be your issue in the election.
For more, lower hair. For more on Robby, follow him on Twitter @Robby Soave.